Okay, we've got our first panel. I know some of them are here. I know some are still on their way, so if you could go ahead and start making your way up. I know that we've got Vice Chairman. See who else. We'll see who I've got all together. I know I think Governor Lewis is on his way. Shaadiin Parrish had let me know she was somewhere around Camp Verde about an hour ago. So I told her if you don't make it, that's fine. We can certainly get you on another panel. But we have Maria Dadgar and Vice Chairman Jerome Kasey. If you can go ahead and start making your way up. So again, I want to thank Lakota and for all of our welcoming speakers. Let's give them one more round of applause. We always appreciate having our students join us. And as mentioned, I know that this event is always well attended, and we appreciate your being here. Like I said, we were a little bit quicker in putting this thing together than we have been in the past. Last year, I think we had it on the second week of December, and it's typically in November, so it's a little bit of a surprise for us to be doing this in October. But it's such a busy place. We constantly have a variety of events happening on a regular basis, and so just in terms of really trying to focus on what's important, know that this planning committee isn't just made up of individuals from Arizona State University. We're agnostic in terms of reaching out to other universities, other tribal communities in other regions to also help us think through these events and be our partners. And so to our committee, we want to acknowledge Agnes Atakai, from the University of Arizona and their College of Public Health. We also had Myra Parker, Seven Directions, at the University of Washington. Dr. Parker, always a great friend and colleague, particularly in this space around programming around social services and substance abuse, suicidal ideations, other these kind of challenges that we have within our community. I know that we've had others from University of North Dakota, UC San Diego that are also been part of our planning committees as well. This year we split it. It got a little bit cumbersome in terms of really the youth element and having a relatively large committee. And so we have two committees, one that helped plan today and another group that's worked specifically on tomorrow, which is going to be our student element of DRIC. And this will be over in La Briola in the Hayden Library. So, if you're registered, you're certainly welcome to attend that. I believe the morning session is going to be virtual on tomorrow as well, and then breakouts in the afternoon, so a very similar format. But again, I know that, as Sally mentioned, this is a topic of particular concern and particular sensitivity. And with that in mind, we wanted to make sure that we have a resident elder. And again, I know that we know that these issues are the types of issues that can trigger. And so we wanted to make sure that we have some folks. Who else? Is it just yourself? Or I think in the afternoon we also have some social, back in the corner, Nate's acknowledging that in our afternoon sessions we have a counselor available for folks that feel like, that we're making them uncomfortable or you're uncomfortable in these conversations. And Rosetta Walker is also a resident elder who works with our students. And so, again, as we did last year, for those that want to, step out and be cleansed, we can give you that opportunity to be smudged if this is something that you feel, is going to really help you, go through, what could potentially be a difficult day for some. We also recognize that, again, we're not here to sensationalize a particular troubling issue, but as Sally suggested, lean into what was the issue and where does research fit in here. So I think, again, coming at this basically eyes wide open, but also, not trying to create any position papers in advance, but really give the community and practitioners, both at the community level and at the agency level, to share their experience and then understand more how do we prevent these types of incidences in the future. So before I jump into the the introductions and questions. Um, this has been in the paper. You know, you're old school when you clip it out of the paper. Um, we got a date. Well, we could have Googled it and found it, but that's another story. So this article was from the Republic last week, from Thursday, October 19th, and it's titled, it was on the front page, it's Attorney General, New Charges in Access Fraud Case, and it's about a particular group of individuals who have been indicted in terms of multiple charges, but I'm just going to read you a short section out of this to help really kind of frame the conversation and also the issue. It does state that in May, state and tribal officials now that hundreds of millions of dollars in Medicaid funds were fleeced from Arizona tribal taxpayers as part of a scheme that used indigenous people. State and tribal officials said that indigenous people were aggressively recruited and in some cases kidnapped from rural areas and taken to fake facilities in the Phoenix area. The victims often were not allowed to leave or contact their loved ones. Some were driven across state lines. We had tribes in Montana that came down looking for their members, for example. But those running the fake clinics were using a billing loophole to get paid more government money by saying that they were providing mental health and substance abuse treatment to the patients, even though they often were not. They were not, according to prosecutors. Some used their fraudulent money to buy lavish homes and cars, according to the court and public records. Meanwhile, their patients suffered far from their homes and were not receiving health treatment as needed. As of October 13th, over 350 providers have had their payments suspended by Access since 2019 for suspected fraud. The number continues to grow as the agency investigates fraudulent claims. So this basically sets the stage in terms of our conversation today, and as mentioned on the agenda, we've got first from really a community tribal leaders perspective, and then practitioners in terms of the response, also at a community level, and then also an agency perspective. And we'll have 3 sessions this morning and then a break somewhere in between there. So, and then the last thing I wanted to also, just in terms of kind of housekeeping, is that we do have a video crew here that we've used in the past. And again, primarily just to document this event. And I think they'll be in and out of some of the breakouts, but also want to be respectful. So if at some point, there's, and they're also going to be interviewing some people off and on. But if you don't want to be interviewed, then great. Or if you're in a session where perhaps this is not a conversation that you think should be taped, just let them know, because they're going to be sensitive to those issues as well. So let's jump into this. And again, thank you again for joining us. And I want to go ahead and just do some quick introductions. And let's see, maybe we'll start with Maria Dadgar, if you could just maybe do a quick introduction. I know we have your bios, but we'll let you introduce yourself. So.
Thank you, Jacob. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Maria Dadgar, Executive Director of the Intertribal Council of Arizona. See a lot of familiar faces. It's good to see everyone. I've been serving as the Executive Director of the Intertribal Council of Arizona for just over 9 years now, going on my 10th year pretty soon. And about 7 years ago, the tribal leaders voted to create a separate entity that I also serve as the Executive Director for, and that is the Intertribal Association of Arizona. So we have 2 organizations that we're running. Both work in tandem. The ITCA, Intertribal Council of Arizona, is where we have our staff and our focus on health, research, and environmental quality. And it's through ITAA, the Intertribal Association of Arizona, that we go to DC and advocate on behalf of many different issues. I'm originally from Maryland. My tribe is called Piscataway, and the town I'm from is called Accokeek, Maryland. And I've been living here for about 25 years. And so I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Next, I'll turn it over to Vice Chairman Jerome Kasey, the third. So,
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Bajonspe, my name is Jerome Kasey III. I'm the Vice Chairman of the White Mountain Apache Tribe. It is actually my 10th year being on council. I started at the age of 32, and voila, the very next day I woke up and I'm 42 years old. It happens quick. Oh man, but I'm very honored to be here. I'm also part Hispanic, and so we share great cultures with my family from either side. And you know, I know Maria here. There's a couple people that I do know here, which is Maria and my assistant who's in the back. Everybody else, I'm very eager to meet you and have discussions with you throughout the day. These topics that we're talking are really sensitive. There's some descriptive information that is on there, and it's something that our people hold very sacred, very traditional. So I really hope you guys can take as much as you can from us during these sessions. Thank you.
okay, thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. So I'm going to start with Vice Chairman Kasey, and we'll just jump into the first question. The first question is, when did White Mountain Apache Tribe first learn of the crisis, and what led your tribe to determine that it was a systemic crisis rather than just isolated events or incidences?
I think with the White Mountain Apache Tribe, there might have been some red flags pre-pandemic, the 2020 pandemic, but it's something that had to be taken a look into. But thereafter, as the pandemic started to happen, we started to see a lot of our tribal members leave the reservation. Where are they going? We don't know what's going on. And then we started to see some really graphic footage on social media that talked about we're supposed to be at this facility, but we're being chased out today. We hope we can get some help. And then we started getting some of our own tribal members who reached out to us and say, you know, as a tribal leader, what can you do to help us? And when these things started to happen, the more red flags started to come up, the more we started to take a look into this. And it was not until we started seeing that the population we usually see congregate, we thought it was just because of the pandemic that they were gone. No, all of a sudden, we started seeing them down here in the valley through social media, through friends, through Facebook, whatever. And it just seems to the issue became a little bit more like, okay, what's going on? And that's when I started to take a look into that. And I really feel that it's not an isolated. I think right now it's hitting almost every tribe. We're all suffering because of it. And right now, I really feel that they're using our tribal members as a pawn of making money when our tribal members are not for sale.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to ask the same question of Maria for your agency. When did the agency first learn of the crisis, and what led the agency to determine systemic versus isolated incidences?
Well, through the Intertribal Council of Arizona, we are a tribal consortium of 21 of the 22 tribes in Arizona. And so I report directly to the highest elected official of those 21 tribes. And so they're really board meetings, but we call them tribal leaders meetings about every 2 months or so. And leading up to each tribal leaders meetings, we tend to get calls. We get news feed. We get information coming in from a variety of sources, and many times tribal leaders themselves, Vice Chairman Kasey's very, very good about calling and saying, hey, are you guys watching this, or do you guys know about that? And so generally, we're focused on 66 different grant programs that we operate. It does involve the community, but we'll see that we'll start to get calls from tribal leaders, community leaders, individuals, that say, hey, we need help. We need the tribal leaders to know about this. And so I think it was around January at a tribal leaders meeting that we were having out at Fort McDowell, when we had some legislators come and start talking about this issue, and bringing it to a level where we began to see this is a crisis. And so, and once we had that information, and then they were talking about legislation that they were going to introduce, but it was kind of vague. We weren't really getting to the bottom of what that legislation would be on the state level. And knowing that we go to Washington, D.C. once per year with tribal leaders, where we really have the tribal leaders really are our best advocates and have they carry a lot of weight when we go to D.C. We started developing what we call an issue paper or a policy statement around the topic. So that involves doing a little research, finding out more, and preparing to go to Washington, D.C. to let our Arizona delegation know what we're facing here in the state and how we need action. And so that started in January, and then by April we were in D.C. I can share this with you, Jacob. We have a PDF version. This is our policy handbook that we take. Every year it changes, so this is from April 2023. And this is one of the topics that we advocated on. And actually, it's the tribal leaders that do the advocacy. You know, the topic, action needed to stop predatory recruitment of indigenous people to rehabilitation centers and sober living homes. And so there's a white paper. We also do sort of an infographic, which is kind of the, you know, get to the point of what we're trying to address. And at that time, we were just bringing it to the attention of our Arizona congressional representatives and senators. And believe it or not, by the time we got back to Arizona from that DC trip, we were getting calls from the governor's office. And so those calls and that action started then. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, what we're really remembering, just as Vice Chairman Kasey just said, is a very sensitive topic. And we're dealing with patients. And so we began to develop what we could do as an organization, which we're still involved with in partnering with the Indian Health Service to provide a command center at PIMC, Phoenix Indian Medical Center, which it's still, we thought we would just need it for 2 weeks to have as an intake center for patients coming in, seeking help, needing help. We just had a call with Dr. Reedhead, the area director for the Indian Health Service, on Thursday of last week. And he's like, till the end of the year, can we borrow your facility? Can we use your facility? And maybe even longer. And of course, we're going to do that. We had to relocate a few programs, but that's okay because this is a crisis. And so it started in January. By April, it was full-blown action.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Kasey, so kind of similar to, or where I think Maria mentioned was how did the tribe respond and how does it continue to respond to the crisis? So.
Thank you for that question. Right now, the way the tribe responded is we started making awareness, and it was also upon my shoulder to take it to any organization that I had, that the tribe is affiliated with, whether it be ITCA or Arizona Indian Gaming Association, the National Congress of American Indians, IGA, the Indian Gaming Association. We took it out there, and we made sure that we spoke about our tribal members being in such a situation as this. Are you also experiencing this? We thought we were the only ones. We really thought that our tribal members were the only ones experiencing this. So we talked about it, and they started to realize that, hey, there is an issue that's happening. And that's when our local Apache behavioral health programs and also our Rainbow Treatment Center, which is an addiction and also mental health facility, started to go and make connections and seeing what can we do to help locate some of these individuals. How can we go and help find some of the individuals that are down there? So partnering together with the local tribas of the tribes here in downtown, we got some people down here. We call them the Boots Underground force here in the Valley area. And we started to go look for them. We started to bring them home because we, so far to date, since my legislative advisor was hired about a year ago, so within about a year and a few months added to that, we had 37 deaths of our tribal members. Rather, they continue to use and their addictions were fed at these centers just to keep them there. We had many tribal members, one night, for instance, 7 tribal members got picked up by a van at 2 o'clock in the morning. And then you multiply that 7 times the initial amount that they're charging per person is how much that company was making. And they're still, to this day, coming out to the reservation to get our tribal members, not knowing, I mean, they know they're being investigated. They know they're being watched. They know they've been caught. But they are so sneaky. They know how to create loopholes that to this day they're still doing it. We have now our local law enforcement involved. We have other individuals that are involved. We're putting more boots on the ground here in the valley to help out our tribal members. We are trying to create a homeless village back home. We don't know what to call it yet. These are just the talks and discussions of making sure our people come home to something so that we could help them help themselves. So that's also where we're at. Where do we go from there? How do we bring them home, and how do we help them help themselves? Do they want to help themselves? So we are in a very thin area. We are in I guess they call it a rock and a hard place, you know, and that's what we're at right now. And with that, we also created the Predatory Treatment Center Task Force. So there's about 20 of us that sit on that task force, and we are reaching out almost every day. We meet every 2 weeks, and we're looking at the policies of access. We're looking at the other policies that deal with tribes and how we can spend money so that we could be able to create better diversion, better preventive measures for our tribes to take. Again, you know, this is something that we take very seriously, and for us to meet every 2 weeks and see how the White Mountain Apache tribe can mitigate these issues. This is where we're at this point in time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Vice Chairman. Again, we want to remind folks, and I think for the benefit of Governor Lewis, you know, that we opened this up with the understanding that this is a sensitive topic, that we, for the afternoon sessions, have counselors available. We also have an elder in resident, you know, for people that feel like, you know, they need to be smudged. We can do this outside, not in here, unfortunately. But really the significance of this issue is one that has impacted all of our communities. And I think what's been most challenging is that we know the, you know, the level of substance abuse and historical trauma and the impacts that it's had on our community. So this is really kind of a perfect storm in terms of predatory practices. And again, Governor Lewis, just to give you a few minutes to introduce yourself, so that we can give you an opportunity to respond to the first question, which was when did your community recognize the crisis, and what led you to determine that this was a systemic issue and not just an isolated one? But I'll let you start out with an introduction, and then you can go to the first question. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Skooksiotic. Anya Anapchuk, Governor Stephen Roe Lewis, Amjad Guaki, Sackatoon, Arizona. Honored to be here to talk about a very critical, ongoing, hasn't been solved yet issue. For the Gila River Indian community, we didn't hear about this from the state. We started to hear about this or from any of the outside agencies or law enforcement agencies. We started to hear about this from our families. We started to hear about horrible stories of abuse, of neglect early on, especially, I think, during the pandemic, the last 3 years of this worldwide emergency health pandemic, when our people were the most vulnerable. We started to document these cases. We didn't know exactly the scale of this issue, but nonetheless, we started to get information through our behavioral health services. The Gila River Indian community, we run our own healthcare facility independent of the federal government, the Gila River Healthcare. And we have our own behavioral health services that we staff with oversight from our community. And so we started to hear about this situation, and it wasn't until the state started to enforce actions, mainly going after their reimbursement of access fund, excuse me, of access funds, that we started to interface with the state government. And I'll tell you, I was very frustrated by the lack of communication at the state level. As tribal leaders, our main goal is to protect every tribal member. And the lack of information that we were getting from the state in regards to just how virulent and how expansive this issue was, which was really a humanitarian crisis of the state's own making, really fell on tribal leaders such as myself, such as the vice chairman, my good friend Jerome Kasey, and members. And I remember those early meetings, vice chairman, at ITCA, when we were just learning about the scope of this tragedy among our people, among our most vulnerable people. But I think for tribal leaders, we had to, we started to information share early on among the 22 tribes here in Arizona. And specifically, I want to give our executive director, Maria Dadgar, a lot of recognition and props for providing that area, that space for us as tribal leaders to start to strategize, because we started to see this and started to hear about this, whether it was anecdotally, firsthand, or or directly through our healthcare and our behavioral health personnel. But sadly, we started to hear these stories, such as vice chairman, and that's when we started to when these cases occur, when these situations occur, and I think those of you that study policy, that study history, policy, and the history of both state and federal policy as it relates to Native American sovereign tribes, you can't wait for the state. You can't wait for the federal government to act. Tribes have to act in their own best interests, and that's what we did.
Thank you, Governor Lewis. So, Maria, as Governor Lewis alluded to, this idea of policy, having worked in tribal government as a policy advisor at Salt River, 20 years ago, but really never really kind of feel like we leave the business when you're from community and live in community. What are the tools or research that was helpful in addressing this crisis at the time? For example, whether it was policy or community-based participatory research or experts in substance abuse. Getting to the more technical aspects, how was this? How did this come into play? I think Governor Lewis alluded to it a little bit in terms of what ITCA was doing. So.
Sure. So I always like to say that ITCA and ITAA are really policy in action, because as I've mentioned earlier, our tribal leaders are our best advocates. They are part of the very complex system that brings information to our attention, whether we're finding out from our own staff, which I see Derek Hart from ITC works in our Tribal Epidemiology Center. Sometimes it comes through our staff, sometimes it comes through tribal leaders, sometimes it comes through community leaders or family. I happen to have family that they live all the way on the Seneca Nation in upstate New York, and they were calling me about this issue because they have Seneca tribal members living here in Arizona that are running rehabilitation centers, and they're actually running legitimate native-owned rehabilitation centers, but they were being affected by all of the negative, the crisis and the negative information that was going around about rehabilitation centers. So it's a very complex system of, information gathering. We have attorneys that help guide our policy making, but we always look at the legal structure of what is happening. And so the Affordable Care Act and other legislation that have been passed over the years really was in place to establish a framework for care for people that were so desperately in need of this type of treatment. And so we have the opioid epidemic happening in our state and across the United States. All of these things are taking place, and it's all happening at once. And so our job at ITCA is to get to the very root of the problem, the issue. We try to go upstream. We see the symptoms down here, but we try to go upstream to see what caused this issue. And so one of the things that we went to DC to advocate on were 3 key issues of what we found needed to happen right away. And this was in April. And once again, I'm just, sharing from our policy booklet that we put together and gave to tribal leaders and went to DC to advocate. But the 3 main things that we were looking at to affect policy was allocate resources to investigate rehabilitation centers and sober living homes that engage in predatory behaviors. This is on a state level. But we go to DC because that brings the attention to our governor and our legislators here in the state. Pass legislation to increase penalties for the brokering of patients and establish rights for individuals residing in these facilities. I think that's now beginning to, be part of the discussion. And our third key point, remember, when you're in DC, everything's in a very short time frame, and you've got to really impact that legislator when you're there. And so our third key point at that time was to strengthen procedures to ensure that those that have been previously found guilty of patient brokering or other fraud are unable to work or own such facilities in the future. And so all of that is ongoing now, and we're in the middle of it. ITCA is being called upon to take on more of the work to address the issue. We have over 60 federal grants and contracts. We have about 70 full-time subject matter staff. We have programs that we have to run that we're responsible for. But yes, this is something else that we are going to get involved in. We are involved in, and then we're actually working to create a new work group to help kind of get to, like I said, get upstream at the problem that led to all of this. And we can talk about that a little more.
Thank you, Maria. Vice Chairman Kasey, the kind of the similar question in terms of White Mountain Apache. What were some of the resources that were available to you in terms of kind of the more technical advice or guidance or recommendations to address the issue for White Mountain Apache tribe?
I think we've been jumping to ITCA a lot, and so we really appreciate her and her crew, that's there, Maria and her crew. And I really don't think there's nothing else that's out there that is helping us. And this is what Governor Lewis is talking about. There's nothing available besides ongoing tribal consultation with access where they do not hear us. They are quick to change policies on their end and tell us in a heartbeat as they're walking out the door and say, by the way, you now got to do it this way. Good luck. We'll talk to you next time. July, August was the last time we were told by the access that they are going to talk about and focus on the subject of predatory treatment centers. After that, it's going back to regular consultation. So these are where the frustrations are. And I know sometimes the state does not want us to highlight these issues. They don't. But as a tribal leader, I'm sovereign. My people are sovereign, and I'm going to stand up for them. I'm not going to let them tell us to be quiet especially when they paint on the news stations a very bad picture about your community and letting everybody out there in the world know that every tribe is exactly like this person. It's very sad when they paint even those individuals like that. Alcoholism is a sickness. It's something that we all need to work together to help these individuals. So there were no policies and tools that were helping us, but people that work with our behavioral and mental health facilities are the ones that were pulling things together. Rainbow Treatment Center under our acting director, Irie Diaz, Vanji Natan, the administrative director, Kevin with the Apache Behavioral Health Services and the board there, plus the local tribas down here, were doing such a phenomenal job of trying to keep up with all of what was happening. It's something that, like we said, we went up to Washington, D.C., we talked to Senators Kelly and Sinema, we talked to Congressman Crane, and they were on board with us to help look into these policies and see what they could do on the behalf of us tribes so that we could stop being penalized. I'll tell you that right now. We're being penalized for the actions of what the state has been doing. And I'm saying state in reference to access. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Governor Lewis, same question in terms of what tools or research was helpful in terms of addressing the crisis for Gila River Indian community.
Right. If I can maybe go back again, when we first started to learn more about this systemic abuse among our community members at the hands of these bad actors, these predatory facilities, there was almost like a next step. They were actually sending representatives, and a lot of them were Native Americans, out to our reservation to recruit our community members and solicit them as patients for their facilities. So what we did was we working with our legal department, our Office of Legal Affairs, we drafted a cease and desist letter in an attempt to stop any of those in-person solicitations on the community. We also started to, within how we could do this as a sovereign nation, we started to use our own tribal civil, regulatory, and administrative processes, such as citing zoning, trespassing, and business license violations to keep those facilities, because those business licenses, right? They're for-profit businesses, to keep those facilities off our reservation and to keep those representatives from continuing to solicit our most vulnerable community members. And initially, when we approached the state about this issue with ITCA, our fellow tribal leaders, I was frustrated about their response because it seemed like they were slow to act. They were with some of their first enforcements, there were still loopholes, right? Being seen in those enforcement actions that these facility owners used as gaps to continue to regroup and to form other for-profit business behavioral health sober living homes. And so they kept on, they would just regroup under different names. But once the state task force was put together, we started to see that that they were looking at ways that they were bringing in the FBI and some enforcement actions, which had to do with their stopping their access reimbursement payments. And at the same time, we started to take our own action at the Gila River Indian community. We developed our own sober living home crisis response team. And we started to work on a safety net for our community members and identify those community members that were in those facilities. Our community's approach was, it was we saw this was an all of government response. So we used all of our departments internally to develop a protocol that identified housing, transportation, medical, and behavioral health services once we started to identify those community members to bring them back to the community. And so, just a few of, and this just shows, how even though there's always a need for tribal nations, but we're very sophisticated in how we work nonetheless. So we had a team, and I want to go through all of our departments that we have in the community. Of course, we have our police department, we have an Office of Emergency Management, we have, again, our Gila River Healthcare Behavioral Health Services, we have a Family Advocacy Center, a Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner, the SANE program, our Protective Services Office, the Tribal Health Department, our Tribal Social Services, Victim Services Department, the Domestic Violence Shelter, Department of Community Services, Elder Services. So we brought those departments together, broke down silos, and it was helpful because in the last 3 years during the pandemic, we had to work more holistically. We had to break down those silos as well. And so we had, in regards to what we created was our COVID task force. So we had that framework in place. And what we did was we just built this protocol on that framework. What was also very critical as well was communication. Our public affairs office, making sure that we got those cease and desist letters, making sure we got the information that we were getting, and to communicate this as warnings to our community members in regards to getting solicited, or your family members getting solicited by these predatory agencies or businesses. So that was very helpful to us. That communication, both whether it was face-to-face or whether it was putting out flyers or on social media as well. That was critical in getting the word out early on, and it continues to be very instrumental as things change, as things are developing. But at the same time, I think what Vice Chairman Kasey was saying, I think there's a government-to-government relationship as well. And so, we saw that as necessary in regards to continuing, to participate, in these ongoing discussions with the Hobbs administration, with Access, with DHS, with the AG's office. I think it was frustrating because, and I'll wrap up here, was because they were consulting with us. They were wanting to know from us what the solutions were when it was a crisis of their own making. I think what early on, and I think in the first two consultations, I'm like, usually when you consult with tribes, you have some sort of a plan in place for us to consult on, for us to give responses back. Consulting with us, we want to know what how you're going to remedy this in regards to access reform, in regards to any types of legislative, changes that need to occur, in real time. And I think that was the frustration, and I have to say that to all of you. And I think just to make this point is, I'm still very frustrated that there is still no plan from the Hobbs administration in regards to addressing the sober living home crisis as we see it today, as we see it in the future.
Thank you, Governor. So I think just to help for those that are unfamiliar with the issue, I can give you a 2-minute on how healthcare is delivered in tribal communities. And it's obviously much deeper than that, but really when you look at the original treaties and executive orders, was that for Native people to submit to being placed on reservation lands and being moved off of their ancestral lands, during a very difficult time, is there was a promise from the federal government about in exchange for really being placed in tribal communities, is that the federal government would provide health, education, and welfare in perpetuity. That our tribal nations and communities as sovereigns within a sovereign nation also have this agreement with the federal government that would, through Bureau of Indian Affairs or through Indian Health Service, through Bureau of Indian Education, would provide those basic services from, again, education to healthcare to social services. And they've never fulfilled a promise in terms of the amount allocated. So on average, I think it's been 30% of unmet need, is being addressed by federal dollars in terms of programming through the federal government. Tribes are in an interesting place because they're also, within a state. And for the most part, the state's preference, and even the tribes to a certain degree, is that the direct relationship is with the federal government and not necessarily with the state. But that doesn't mean that we aren't members of the state, that we aren't payers, into the tax system. We don't not pay taxes. I don't, unless you live within your own community. I don't live within my own community, so I pay state tax. I do shopping at Target and other places, so I'm contributing into the state revenue. And so it was, I think, in the mid-'80s, and there's others that are going to maybe have to correct me on this, when the Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System was created, which is an interesting name because it didn't contain cost in this case, but really a kind of a continuation of the Center for Medicare Services, CMS. CMS provides, the federal dollars for healthcare delivery through Medicaid and Medicare. So each state sets up its own system by which it then allocates public health care delivery through members of the state. And when that system was first set up, tribes were barred from participating with access, in part because the state said, well, you don't need access because you have your own direct line to Indian Health Service. And the response was no. We also, these are federal dollars as well, and that the tribe should have access to these same sources. And so it took a lawsuit, and I think some litigation before the Arizona State Healthcare, system, cost containment system, included tribes as part of that. So, and in some ways, it's made it more viable for tribes to run their own facilities and their own healthcare delivery. If they were just to run facilities on Indian Health Service dollars, then it just isn't doable. But this kind of turn on third-party billing, that developed over, the late 80s, early 90s, has made it financially viable for tribes to run their own facilities, through compacting and contracting. And unfortunately, it also created this loophole in that these agencies are able to take advantage because it's a different way in terms of a provider that's only a state provider and how they would, bill access versus if they're doing it within a tribal community. So we have this really kind of, multi-layered, complex system, and that's just social services. We're not talking about, this is behavioral health services. We're not talking about social services or direct care or, other services. And so I appreciate the work that the individuals here at the table do because they have to navigate through this complex system, but also, defend the tribes in the process because whether it's the federal government or the state, or they're not always willing to be, good partners with our tribal nations and communities and uphold those original agreements that were made in exchange for, tribes being placed on reservation lands. And for our elected leaders, it's important that we keep the federal government on the hook. This was a promise that was made, but it has to be delivered in a way that works for our members and our communities. So with that, this kind of next round of questions, and I want to try and save a little bit of time, maybe in about 10-15 minutes for a few questions, is really to the heart of the matter for the university and those that are here today, perhaps as practitioners or researchers. And I would set this up by saying that I served on the State Board of Education, and K-12 was relatively new for me. I understood tribal policy in general, but I was still learning K-12. And somebody from the department said, oh, there was a colloquium over at ASU, and they had, the top researchers in Indian education were, had a colloquium, and they had a discussion amongst, all the work that they're doing. So I thought, well, great, were the tribes invited? And the answer was no, it was a colloquium. It's like, well, what's a colloquium? Well, it's researchers getting together and talking about amongst themselves about the research they're doing. So my question was, how does this help us in our communities when our researchers aren't sharing that information, with individual communities that are dearly in need of, better education in our K-12 systems? Ultimately, it gets out there, but this is kind of the rub in terms of universities and research in terms of what we do in the ivory tower, and I know that's not necessarily the case, but certainly, the stereotype. And so this discussion and this forum is really, how do we bridge, how do we integrate what's happening in community in terms of what you all, can do to contribute or maybe doing already that we're just not aware of. So this question to, and again, I'll start on the far end and then we'll work this way, is so what expertise can universities provide to meet the needs of your tribal communities, agencies, or individuals affected by the silver living housing crisis and or substance abuse as well? And I'll start with Maria. So.
Well, in general, I believe this is a very, very complex issue. And I think it's going to take more than one agency or one organization such as ITCA, or I think it's going to take an entire community of academics, law enforcement, tribal leaders, the state. And so I think that the university would be the ideal place to hold a forum for developing that plan that Governor Lewis just referred to. There were, about a month ago, I almost felt that ITCA was being put on the spot to create the plan that the state needed because they felt that we could get tribal leader buy-in, which is inappropriate. Tribal leaders aren't looking to buy into something. They're looking for a solid solution, a path forward, and something that will never allow this to happen again. And I worked at universities long enough to know that we do have within universities the resources to bring together teams and to develop plans. And I know that that's what's needed now. And I think that a partnership with whether it's between ITCA and Arizona State University under Jacob's leadership, putting you on the spot, with tribal leaders, I think we could really work to maybe form a basis of a plan just so that we have a guiding tool moving forward. And so when the state comes up with their plan, we can see if it's falling short or not. Okay. Thanks.
Vice Chairman Kasey, same question. So.
Thank you. Well, I'm a student myself in psychology, so I was excited about this question. I think it's a great start to get some partnerships and MOUs, MOAs with the tribes, whether they're undergraduate or graduate school students, so that they could start working hands-on and do some internships with our behavioral health and other treatment facilities that we have up there. Especially those of you guys that took Psychology 230, Statistics and Data. So boring, but if you were just to add the hands-on and do your math there on the reservation, I think it would be a wonderful setting for us to learn from each other and create these policies, and whether it's through NAU, U of A, or ASU. This is something that we can work on and help create a lot of the research and the data, and then also knowing what's culturally sensitive when we put research together. Some of the questions aren't so good for people on the reservation because some is sensitive to the people that we talk to. Some of them are elders, some of them respect the cultures and the traditions, and some of them are just open-minded and will speak freely. And so we need to find that median when we do that. And then also, I think helping the tribes with money talks. Let's get straight to the point. And that's the reason why we have this crisis. If we were to have some kind of help in writing grants so that we can obtain some of those dollars to help us create policies, to help us create whatever we need to do, and maybe even have subject matter experts from the universities work with our reservations and our governments, so that we can have good reading into the policies that are being driven to us and that are being forced down our throats. I think that's something that we need to do, because the policies that are coming from the state, they're written so quick, they're written so fast, they know what they're doing. But we need someone from our end, and maybe from the university, could help us get that together, where we can get an actual just in-depth definition of all of what's there in paper, what's in black and white. So I think those are a few of the points that I have, and include us on some of this discussion, like you stated earlier, so that way we know what's being taught out there. And I think together as a tribal government and as the school, we could make a lot of things happen and change in the future.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Governor Lewis, how can universities provide the needs or meet the needs of your tribal community? So,
Well, as you know, Arizona, this is ground zero for this crisis, and this is still going on. So, we have to make sure that, that this doesn't show up in other areas as well. That this model, so ASU and other universities, especially here in Arizona, that have a commitment to the 22 tribes here, you can play a key role. First, we're highlighting this issue to begin with, but also not as a post-mortem, but moving forward, ongoing to highlight those lessons learned and those best practices, so that this model doesn't show up anywhere else. As we know, this didn't just affect tribes here in Arizona. They started to recruit outside of the borders of Arizona as well. I had the opportunity to give a keynote at the first Tribal Opioid Summit, and I used that as an opportunity to warn tribes up in the Northwest Coast about what was going on here, so it would not spread anywhere else in Indian country as well. So, I think this panel can really, and I think the highlighting this issue, I think it's so important, really at this time, because it's still developing. I think it's important, especially working with you subject matter expertise, you emerging leaders in research, that if we can come out with a proper response and a framework for tribes that could be developed here at places like ASU, to be a framework for the governor's office and the state agencies to move more quicker and more comprehensive with their responses than they have been. This crisis is going to provide some lessons, tragically, but nonetheless, hopefully we can develop some new and innovative philosophies and protocols for tribes, because we have to get away from this anachronistic, paternalistic responses from the state and from the federal government that we're still dealing with now, that is still really preventing any innovative solutions in regards to the sober living home crisis that we're still in. And I think also, then I want to circle around as a final note, when research and surveys, when they utilize tribal data and tribal member information, especially in this context, it's critical, it's important, it's out of respect to ensure that there is coordination with the tribal internal processes as well, whether it's our IRBs or research and review committees as well. Data sovereignty and the protection of our tribal information is important to tribes as sovereign nations. And I'd ask that anyone collecting data for publication or other or other purposes, work with tribes respectfully and respect their internal defined processes. So that's the last thing that any of us would want, especially now out of our tribal members, is a violation of their information. Because in effect, they would be traumatized twice. Thank you.
thank you, Governor Lewis. So I'm going to take a couple questions if we have any. If you have a burning question for tribal leaders, there's microphone stands that are set up in the middle of the room. And then to prompt our panelists, just know that we'll try and cut this off in 10 minutes and then give our panelists an opportunity for any closing comments as we wrap up this session. So, Eddie, go ahead.
Dr. Moore, you asked how Arizona State University College of Health can assist. I'm a former addict. And I'm happy to share how I got rid of my addiction. I tried all these veterans centers, hospitals, clinics, didn't work. Finally, I said to myself, you know what? I prayed. I ate vegetables for 7 days, which I couldn't stand, but I got rid of it. I went on to manage 2 major global corporations. I was a senior officer. So that's how I shared it. I believe that ASU, College of Health, have the capability to gather data. As Governor Lewis stated, lack of information is the problem. If we can focus on creating a database of people like me who overcame their addiction, all their health problems, and put it under your database, I think we will be able to do more research in that area and say, these are the great solutions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Mr. Tanteco. So. Any other questions? Oh, we got a shy group here, so. And know that, this is just the first session. We've got practitioners, community level, agency level. For our next couple panels, we're between you and a short break. But before we go there, I want to go back to our panelists and give them an opportunity for any really kind of closing comments. And we'll start with Maria.
I believe this is such an important topic. Excuse me. And, we found a link between what's happening with the fraudulent sober living homes and missing and murdered Indigenous peoples. And so these are high top priorities for our tribal leaders and for our organization and for our community. And so I think we just need to stand strong and gather our resources and work together and address this issue standing strong, because backing down or leaving it to someone else is not going to solve the problem. And so I'm just happy that we're having this conversation, getting the word out, sharing information and resources. And we'll be going to the National Congress of American Indians. It's a big national, it really is our Congress for 574 tribes across the United States to have our opportunity to meet and share. Vice Chairman Kasey and Governor Lewis are very, prominent leaders with NCAI, and so we'll be carrying this topic forward even there. But thank you.
Vice Chairman Kasey.
Well, first off, I want to say thank you to you and to the university for the invite. I'm very honored. This is something that's really dear to me. It's something that has affected our families. A couple of weeks ago, and one of the stories that I'm willing to share is a couple of weeks ago, one of my nephews was found in a canal out in Chandler, already exposed to the elements outdoor. He was decaying when his other brother was found just a day later next to a dumpster, and they both passed away, and they were supposed to be at a living facility. Prior to that, I had another nephew who came down here to help. And the way my elders back home stated was how you see the tears in our elders, and they say they only went for help, but they never came home. If you were to say that in your own language, it has more powerful impact. And since we started to see that happen, and to know that they'll never come by the house and knock on the door and talk to my mom and say, Grandma, can we come in? Grandma, can we stay here? I don't want to go home yet because I still have a hangover, and Grandma makes her goulash or her menudo, and she cures them with that and with her love. And to know that they'll never come back again, you now multiply that times the many tribal homes that are out there and the many tribal communities that have been suffering because of this throughout Indian country. That's why I'm here today. I'm the voice for those that have been silent, and I think with all of you guys here around the table, we can make sure that this is spoken of loud and clear. Another thing that I think I can suggest to the universities and to the schools and colleges is, how can we develop something that would help? There's a lot of also elders that are back home that deal with some addictions, but you hardly hear of gerontology, psychology doing studies on those individuals of the older age population. Maybe that's something we need to take a look at. Maybe we could start taking a look at the preventive measures for kids who are at risk, and a majority of our students back home are at risk because they come from low-income single-family homes. How do we target those individuals? And that's a question I'm going to leave with those of you guys that are around the table today. You guys are graduates, graduate studied individuals, or you guys are undergrads, or you guys are the experts in here. How can we get together and have this discussion? I'm open to those discussions. I'm open to see what we can do for our people back home. Again, one day I hope to be one of those experts because I don't plan on being in politics forever. I'm only here just for the interim of how else I can help out the people back home. And I really do hope that we can have those continued discussions moving forward. Thank you, and God bless each and every one of you. Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Kasey. Governor Lewis.
Yeah, I think, thank you again, ASU, for having this very important panel. I mean, it's important, it's a timely issue, and it's going to take all of us together from going forward continually. You know, we all have a role, but I think from a policy perspective, from a sovereignty perspective, it's the role of the tribal government and sovereignty that must be at the center. I think when you have these bad actors that are allowed to have some level of autonomy within these critical areas, such as behavioral health, you start to see this exploitation that occurs. And that needs to stop. There needs to be a stopgap to that is respectful and supports tribal sovereignty. And you know, this is a tragic example of what happens when, you know, these predatory agencies, these for-profit agencies find a crack. And in this case, it was a crack made by the state government. So sadly, you know, what we're talking about here on this panel is what went wrong, what's continually an unmet need. Hopefully, as we move forward, working with all you, you know, the best and brightest minds in this room, you know, hopefully we can start to chart some path of innovation, some sort of, you know, of policy and best practices, you know, that we can start to address this issue. We haven't even gotten our arms around this issue yet. I know the state hasn't. Although this is Access and this is a state-funded program, where does Access get their money? They get their money from the federal government. So this also goes to you know, the trust responsibility that the federal government has towards tribes. I see this, the federal government is not living up to their responsibility, and the state is walking away from it unless they finally find a solution to this. So I hope moving forward, you know, I didn't want to go there, but I know that, you know, Vice Chairman, you know, we are speaking right now. We are speaking from those that don't have a voice, that those that are lost. We've lost loved ones to this terrible crisis, and we're speaking for them. We're speaking for their family members. We're speaking for those mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters that were lost. Who's gonna speak for their children? Who's gonna speak for their family members? I hope that comes out strong and clear as we look forward, as we start to chart a path forward. But I want to thank ASU for creating the space, at least for this time, to address this issue. Mosapa, thank you.
Thank you, Governor. So in closing, again, you know, this is really just an opportunity for us to understand what is the issue. You know, we haven't even got to the stage of what are the recommendations, what is the state going to do, what does the state need, you know, what do the tribes need. It's a multifaceted, which is why we're having a variety of perspectives this morning to kind of share from where they sit. You know, the other that I think is still concerning is the fact that oftentimes when we address these policy issues, you know, there's usually a knee-jerk reaction which, you know, has its unintended consequences. So when we looked at the number of agencies whose license or payments have been suspended, there's also a concern that there are good agencies who have also been suspended. So the fact of the matter is that there's still, you know, tribal members in need of health care, behavioral health services, But the way the state's reacted is that it's also put, good providers and facilities in jeopardy as well, as a result of some bad actors. So, what is a precise way in which we can deliver policy? As mentioned, this is really I wouldn't say the only reason, because this is important to do regardless in terms of our engagement with our tribal communities and understanding what are their priorities and how do we fit in versus the opposite. But the other is on this consultation policy that was put in place in 2015 was getting a resolution from the Intertribal Council. It was then taken to the Board of Regents for approval. And I know that there was a draft previously, which was pretty extensive. It was like about 20 or 25 pages, and we thought, we need this to be enacted while Luann Leonard is still a regent, and she had about a year left, so we had to kind of back into getting this done. So we wanted to strip out some of the more contentious language and put in what is a consultation policy. And, we met with the Intertribal Council with the tribal leaders and said, can we get back to the table and, get this draft policy, which has been dormant for a few years, back on the table again. Then we joked around about, don't give it to the attorneys because it'll never see the light of day. But let's see if we can put something in place. And the tribal leaders agreed to strip it down to strictly consultation, and then let's talk about these more contentious issues and ways that we can work respectfully with one another. And when this went before Intertribal Council, it was a packed room. And before we went, in front of the council, they had Indian Health Service, EPA, and Department of Revenue were there. Again, really on some pretty challenging issues, and tribes were pretty upset with them for good reason. And so it wasn't a pretty meeting. And I was a little bit worried because I thought, we're the universities and we're next, and so, but what we shared with them is that all those discussions that happened prior to ours was based on good data and good research. And I reminded the tribal leaders that you're sending your students to our institutions to get their degrees, to work on their thesis, to develop those skills, to do those, internships, or what are some of the more, what do you all do in social services? Practicums, or he just took a bite of food, so I'll put Chris on the spot on social services. But can we work on those agreements so that we're not delaying, the graduation of our students who the tribes are spending significant money in scholarship to send them to our institutions so that they can engage in the work and really develop, the necessary skills to come back and be those providers of research to their leaders or become those leaders. And so, our suggestion then was, let's build a bridge from both sides. Let's help tribes, kind of in your own structure in terms of your IRB. What is it necessary for us to find a place in the middle, and for our institutions, our universities, to understand our roles and responsibilities and how we do this, and with proper protocol in a respectful way in terms of protecting the data of our tribal communities, but really be able to engage in a way that our institutions should. That in our charter, it is about taking responsibility for the social, cultural, and economic and health of our communities that we serve. So I would hope that, again, this is an opportunity for us to begin that process and really take on some of our most challenging issues. So again, thank you all for your time, and again, God bless to our leadership for the work that you're doing and the challenges that you deal with, and let's give them one more round of applause. So thank you.